Okay, welcome everyone. I wanted to thank you for joining our weekly Ask the Expert session. The goal of this weekly session is to help Californian business owners in the cannabis industry to help and grow and scale their business. And every week we have some guests that help share their insights and expertise, obviously to grow their business. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to get to them. Today, we've got the privilege of having Yelena Katchko and Wesley Hein join us. Wesley Hein is a seasoned expert in the cannabis industry. He has got a proven track record of guiding dispensaries towards growth and scalability. He currently heads up Mammoth's distribution global brand initiatives and is also president of the Cannabis Distributors Association and on the board of the California Cannabis Manufacturers Association. It's a mouthful, but he's a seasoned expert, and we're thrilled to have him with us. And then we also have Yelena Katchko, and she's a founding partner of KVK, which is a well-regarded law firm in LA. She's also a distinguished attorney in the cannabis industry and known for her expertise in the cannabis business law, compliance, and licensing. So thank you. Welcome, Yelena and Wesley. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction.
Perfect. Yeah, could you maybe just, I know I've given you a brief intro, maybe just a quick highlight in terms of a bit of your background and just what you're currently working on.
Yelena, you want to go first?
Sure. I have been representing businesses in the cannabis space in California since about 2010. I became involved, particularly in the city of Los Angeles when their first ordinance occurred, and I've been working with retailers, distributors, manufacturers, cultivators to enact the regulations that are currently in the city of Los Angeles. Also helping with the state regulatory agencies, and since up to 2018 it was all about getting the regulations in place. Since 2018 to date, it's all about figuring out the regulations, hopefully improving the regulations, maintaining compliance, and making sure that these businesses continue operating, and hopefully improving the regulations, since they're of course an ever evolving set of rules.
Awesome.
And then
Wesley?
Yeah, our company, which is named Mammoth Distribution, which is a bit of a misnomer, because while we do have a distribution company, we're really more focused on, and we're most known, I should say, for being a home of brands. We grew out of a brand called Heavy Hitters, which we'd started long ago. In fact, started not long after the landmark 1996 Prop 215 Medical Marijuana Act in California, where people could kind of come out of the shadows at least a little bit and start operating. And then Heavy Hitters grew into Mammoth Distribution. We launched other brands, Almora and Surplus, did a partnership with a brand called Lift Tickets. And then our distribution company, in addition to distributing our own brands in California, we distribute 710 Labs, very well-known concentrates company, and wellness company, Papa and Barkley. And then last year we launched in New York. And despite what and maybe we'll be talking a little bit about it, despite all the craziness people have been going through with the licensing and some of the things on their, very difficult rollout. Fact is, it's a very populous state and people love weed there. So things have been going for us, have been going really well. And the operators that have been able to open, it's currently 78. Almost all of them are doing very good business. So we're really excited about that market going forward.
Excellent. And could you, we've got a lot of customers looking to get into the cannabis industry or looking to expand. Can you give us just some insights in terms of sort of latest best practice in terms of getting a cannabis license?
Well, Yelena, first thing I say is call a lawyer. So I want to
Yes, contact a legal representative immediately. I mean, so first of all, it depends where you're getting a license. So the state of California obviously has a state licensing framework, but it's a dual licensing structure. So there's a local license and there's a state license, which differs from, some other states where you may just have a state license. But there are so many different jurisdictions here in California, over 400. So, it is required that you first start at the location where you, for example, have a building. So, I mean, first and foremost, you have to find a compliant location. There are lots of zoning rules and you know, various things like that. So you have to secure something within the jurisdiction that you're in. You have to look up the rules there. You have to figure out what kind of process it is, whether it's a land use-based process, conditional use, a permit, or a merit-based application where you basically apply in a point system and get awarded points for experience, and security, what your building's going to look like, just various things that the local jurisdictions award points on. So there's quite a bit of research to do before you can even start applying for a license, which is why, we always recommend to consult with an attorney. And, you don't want to get into a lease, without knowing for sure that you're going to get a license and various things like that, they may incur liabilities, but that would be the first step, figure out what the requirements are in the jurisdiction you apply and secure a location. And then after that, you can, go through the application process. And then of course, once you get the local license, then you have to deal with the state application process.
And then, a few other things. So that one way to get a license, right, is applying for it, right, Yelena? Another is to go ahead and buy one. And once again, I would tell if somebody said, hey, we found somebody who wants to sell their license, I'd say, call Yelena if it were in California, or call somebody who really knows, do you want to sort of jump in on some of the pitfalls in that? Then I've got a few things to add in.
Yeah, I mean, acquiring a license, same thing. There are certain rules that prevent you from just transferring ownership. I mean, so for example, licenses are non-transferable, but if you're transferring, a membership interest or stock in a corporation, that's usually permitted, but that also requires figuring out what is the process in each local jurisdiction to get approval of those ownership changes, because essentially the cities give you a license and they do a background check and they want to make sure that the people that are operating the business are good operators, don't have certain disqualifying criminal convictions. So it's really important for the local jurisdiction to know who the owners are, especially anybody who holds 20% or more. So there's always some sort of regulatory approval process. So, when people, we actually, our firm, we handle the transactions, but we also assist on larger scale transaction, publicly traded, big companies with law firms that, for example, don't do the regulatory piece, but are doing the security piece. And then we get involved in sort of letting them know, okay, hey, this jurisdiction, you're going to do this and so on. And sometimes, these are transactions that involve maybe 10 different companies and they're all in different jurisdictions, and you kind of have to structure the entire deal around, all these hoops that you have to jump through. And then, then there's, of course, some jurisdictions that do allow license transfer. So you can buy the asset itself versus, stock or equity interest of a company. So, that's something to explore. That's always, better for the buyer because you don't have to take on the liabilities. Like, most of these businesses, as, Wesley knows, will have a ton of, various tax liability or vendor liability. And, there's buyers don't want to assume that if you weren't operating a great business, if you weren't paying your taxes, that's not something that a buyer is going to want to, step into and sort of take responsibility for. So a lot of due diligence and, a lot of sort of different avenues that you can take. And then, of course, getting a new, if you acquire an asset, not the company, then you have to apply for a new state license because those are non-transferable. You can't just transfer one state license to another entity. So then that requires you applying for a whole new state license, and there could be some, potentially downtime. So a lot of different considerations. I know I'm, rambling on different aspects, but it's not an easy process, but there are options. If you don't apply for a license, you can absolutely acquire one. You just have to make sure that, you cross all the T's and dot all the I's.
So I'm going to ask myself a question because I wanted this, which is, of course, any of you can answer it, but what is the biggest mistake that people or companies make as they've gotten their license? And the answer is because jurisdictions and states together make it such a lengthy and overly complex and expensive process. It can actually feel like I've got my license, I'm done, I'm celebrating. And the reality is it's not even the first step. If you were opening up a coffee shop or a bookstore, right, or a shoe store, it wouldn't be, oh my God, I got my license, I'm done. You'd go, that's a small checkmark. Do I have financing for this? Do I have marketing? Do I have my inventory and all those? And the licensing process has just sucked the life out of so many people that they get their license and then they're not ready for what the real business is, which is launching and running. And, you know, we've seen that play out in Los Angeles. It's just been tragic because people worked so hard and went so long. And as Yelena said, some of these people, in fact, all of them had to have a premises to even apply. So they were paying for business, you know, their premises for in some cases years. But none of that matters, right? Because once they got their license, they have to go, but it just used too much of the dry powder. So the biggest advice is it's just one thing. Don't let it become consuming, and certainly don't go celebrate the day you got it thinking that it's any kind of accomplishment other than just the beginning.
Yeah, you have to have exactly what you're saying. You have to have sufficient capital to get to the point of where you get the license, and also to float you until you can actually start, you know, making money by utilizing that license, which, you know, can sometimes take quite a bit of time. And of course, depending on what type of business you are and, you know, what taxes you're subject to and things like that. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I know, like, on top of most entrepreneurs' minds is like, what's the quickest way to do it, and how much does it cost? And so, you know, if you're looking at getting a new license versus buying an existing license, what are your recommendations in terms of, and what can people expect in terms of sort of time and cost?
It's a loaded question. Well, in a couple avenues. One, what type of license? That was probably the first question to ask, right? Because, you know, there are certain licenses that are limited. So retail licenses are those licenses that, you know, are capped in the majority of jurisdictions, right? Because most jurisdictions don't want the traffic disruption, you know, the lines, the retail operations. So those are usually limited. So with a retail license, you're probably going to want to get an avenue of going on through or acquiring an existing license. There are some opportunities in new jurisdictions, but, you know, it takes quite a bit and you have to go through quite a long process. So if you're well capitalized, you might as well, you know, you come in, you wait till somebody gets the license, and then you just come and pick up the license, you know, once everything's sort of done for you. Now, of course, the cheapest, well, potentially, you know, the most cost-effective ways to apply for your own license, because, you know, paying licensing fees and that would potentially be cheaper than, you know, buying a license from somebody that already put in all that time and work. But that's, you know, before distribution, manufacturing for some of the other licenses that are, for example, not capped, you know, it's very clear that it's easier to go and apply for a license, except if you're in the city of Los Angeles, where you're still on this provisional license structure and you can't operate until you get an annual license. I mean, to get an annual license, the city will project like a year or more, basically. So if you start your process for applying for a license today, it'll probably be a year plus till you actually get an annual local license, an annual state license, clear the CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality and Protection Act requirements. So if you're somebody who's trying to get operational as soon as possible, then once again, you're falling back on, I'd rather get a license that potentially is already operational than wait for a year plus to get one. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of factors you have to evaluate.
Yeah, it's a very fluid, you know, sort of situation. If we look at New York, not that long ago, MedMen had entered into a contract, and I'm paraphrasing, right, but to sell their 4 stores and some of their operations. And I can't remember the price, but it was probably close to $100 million. Then MedMen went through a change, and it was like, we don't want to sell these; they're too valuable. Then MARTA and the rollout started in New York, where people could go into dispensaries and they didn't need a medical card, devalued the value of those medical licenses to the point that the two parties kept suing each other, but no longer was who got the asset. They wanted the other person to have to take the asset. And that's how quickly things can change. I mean, people have made a lot of money, maybe even some of Yelena's clients, where what their skill was writing applications. They'd get the application and then they would turn around and sell it as soon as it was awarded to them. And did very, very well. And these were limited license areas where only so many people were going to be able to get. But then, you know, all of it takes is a new administration or a new bill or a ballot initiative. And instead of there only being 5 players, they say, let's have 550 players. Right. And then all of a sudden the value of those licenses potentially drops a lot. And I say potentially because sometimes then it's held up for 3 or 4 years as people sue and countersue and so forth. So in many ways, it's like how quickly do you want to get in the market? If you have patience, you should never buy. But if you want to get in, or if you're buying a business, right? Location, 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 right? Buying a business where the licenses are just one part of it, always makes sense if that's fitting your criteria.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And Yelena, I think in the beginning you mentioned that one of the first steps to opening, a dispensary is about getting the license and contacting a lawyer, obviously. So maybe people are starting to think about second steps and, raising funds and money. So how does one go about raising money in the cannabis industry? And is it different than raising capital in other markets? And that's for either of you, Wesley or Yelena.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Wesley can tell you from more practical experience. I'll tell you from sort of, observation, from clients. And yeah, it's very different than any other business because you can't go to a bank and just take a loan like any other business can, or there's no, small business loans or, whatever other options, the traditional lending options that are available because it's a federally illegal business. So a lot of the banking institutions want nothing to do with you once they find out you're in the cannabis industry. So you have to go to a hard money lender, which is not a traditional lender. It's somebody, a fund or somebody with, a lot of money that essentially is lending. And then you're getting an enormous interest, right? I mean, you're just, getting, I don't know, Wesley, what's like 15, 20%. I mean, just something, pretty, pretty high. And, and you have to, your terms are just not as favorable as if you were somebody, from sort of any other traditional business and going and obtaining a loan elsewhere. You also can't get a bank account, so now you potentially got, okay, I've got my, hard money loan and, somebody's actually willing to lend money to me. And now, where do I keep that money? I mean, that's a whole other problem, right? Like you need to figure out, which banks are going to bank with you. And now, over the last years, there are a couple banks like Dama, and I think East West is now banking with cannabis businesses. There are, a couple of institutions have set up specifically to target, cannabis businesses, but also very expensive because, they have to deal with cash. And there's a lot of compliance on the banking and finance side when you're, running through cash that they're required to do. And that's expensive. So, there's fees associated with anything that you want to do. So essentially, you've gotten the capital, you've gotten the loan. Now, today, say it was 2018, people were throwing money at cannabis businesses. Anybody, any hard money lenders are just dying, any investor dying to get into the space. Today, I think you're gonna have a harder time to find a hard money lender or investor that, that wants to lend to a cannabis business, and they're gonna want to see your financials. They're going to see your, budget, your, projections, everything from A to Z, because they're going to be a lot more hesitant to lend money to a cannabis business, seeing as, what has happened with a lot of these businesses. I mean, so many of the big guys are now restructuring or, some other, form of bankruptcy is not available to cannabis businesses because it's also a federal process. So whatever the, available state processes are. So, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's also about timing. And today, you're even at a more disadvantage of obtaining some sort of funding or investment because of the state of the industry.
So you have a slightly different take. First off, everything she said is exactly right, but I would count the part that's associated with cannabis to be about 10% of it, meaning it's absolutely right. My previous life was helping people raise money for technology companies, and all of the same lessons apply to cannabis, and they probably apply to bakeries and donut shops and sort of anything else. And my sort of experience is people would always overcomplicate it, thinking there was some key. It's like, should I do 3-year financials? I read somewhere that I should do 5-year financials. Should I have a presentation? Should it be 15 pages or 50? It doesn't matter. I would see people get deals done with very sophisticated investors that maybe put me through the ringer. And then I heard they did something, on the back of a napkin at a happy hour because they love the idea so much. And that's really the key, which is make yourself investable, right? And then even in today's market, in fact, I would say particularly in today's market, there's so much capital out there. But it's on the sidelines because people are going, I mean, I'm not sure if there's any retailers that have launched in the last couple of years that are not, sort of chains that are single that are able to be profitable right now. They're good. They're just these very structural sorts of things. And so, of course, it's very difficult, sort of for them. Then again, there's others that are out there. They're doing smart deals. They're rolling up. They're aggregating. And even if they're not profitable, they have this amazing path and story that they can put in front of an investor. And I think that it's sort of like if somebody's like, I can't raise money, I got this great idea for a pre-roll and nobody wants to fund it. Well, okay, like that's not surprising. But if somebody goes, hey, I have this great idea, and in fact, I'll even give an example. Is we came across a company and they said, oh, we have this emulsion technology, and you're like, great, you're the 30th person to call this month with emulsion. Give me your pitch. Well, it was developed in Israel. It was pharma. We did this. We licensed this. We did. I mean, by the time they were finished, it was, holy cow. Are you looking for money? No, we have these 4 investors. And I was like, I'm not surprised. And so, every situation is going to be different, but you have to think your perspective, not from yours, why you need the money. Nobody really cares. It's why does somebody want to give you money versus the other 30 people that have called them up that week? And if you can articulate and have something for that, I promise you can get funding. I mean, it is definitely out there.
Yeah, and I think that you sort of hit on an interesting topic as to, what are sort of the long-term goals are for people in the business, right? I mean, there are some people that are, just exactly what you're saying, have chains, build up something to essentially, sell out to pharma, or who, whenever it gets rescheduled or descheduled or becomes federally, whenever the big things happen, they're just sitting and waiting and preparing for that. But then there are many people that this is their sole income, you know what I mean? This is their, we call it the mom and pop stores, and there's some of them that are a little bit bigger than mom and pops, but they're not interested in going to a different industry. This is all they know, and this is what they want to do. And yeah, they're not interested in selling. They're interested in sort of maintaining this business long term. So yeah, I mean, they're very different, goals, and the people that are interested in maintaining this long term and are sort of using it as their main source of income are definitely the ones that are struggling right now, because they're not trying to take on investors or, sort of, because they don't want to dilute their ownership. They want to be the owners. They want to keep their business. And I would say that, they're the ones that are probably struggling the most right now.
It is. And that's a really good point, because investors understand they're investing with a very clear objective of being able to get their money back in X number. And if they're investing somebody else's money, they often have conditions on that, where the fund, if it's a fund, the fund has to wrap up within 10 years. Somebody might already be 3 or 4 years into it. So they're going, look, at 7 years, I have registration rights, I have liquidation rights, I have all these sorts of things. So those are the kinds of things, Yelena, I think you're really bringing up, where in other industries, you'd be able to have vendor financing, you'd be able to have these things. And that not even isn't so much, I think, the fact that it's federally illegal. We're just not a mature enough business where whether the distributors or the manufacturers, the brands, and so many things that people might necessarily look to, they themselves have been looking for somebody else. And I think that the real answer on the mom and pops and the struggling mom and pops isn't so much the capitalization, but it's lowering those just ridiculous and unnecessary costs and the taxes that are placed on them. So it can be a lifetime business that they turn around and give to their kids, or they sell when they want to retire, as opposed to have to raise money to stay in business. Because again, what kind of pitch is that to an investor? I need to pay payroll. Will you invest in my business? Well, it's true, and that's how they feel, but investors are going to go like, what's the, then what happens next month and the month after that? So I know we've sort of bridged away from raising money into some of the systemic problems, but that's certainly one of the biggest topics and the most important things. And, that's just, virtually every license type and everybody in the supply chain needs to be doubling down on efforts to be able to start reeling back some of these ridiculous regulations and, excessive taxation that, I think we all know and hear about, but we are so far have been very entrenched and difficult to deal with.
Awesome. Yeah, those are really great points. And if we had to segue into from a business owner's perspective, in terms of you have your dispensaries or your multi-locations, a key factor is really optimizing your store and optimizing your operations, and 280E obviously plays a big role in that. Can you guys give us a little bit of background in terms of where are we at with that, and what should dispensary owners know about 280E and how to sort of optimize that?
Well, if they're hearing about 280E from us and they're
It's a
operating,
bit too late.
they need to hire their accountant and maybe get a good criminal attorney. No, 280E, I think most people know, and if you're not in the cannabis industry, it's best just to sort of Google it, but it was never meant to apply to the cannabis industry. It has a long and kind of funny and true history that it didn't think it was just basically a reaction from a cocaine dealer that was able to successfully challenge his tax return and write off certain things. They're like, we'll never let that happen again. Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. Well, cannabis, even though it never should have been on the schedule, never should have been illegal, was put on Schedule 1, and it was many years into this that somehow, I don't even know if it was an IRS agent, I forgot, Yelena, if you know, but it was like, we're getting all these returns from cannabis company, they're Schedule 1, they're charging normal business expenses, you're not allowed to do that under 280E. And when as recently as like 7 or 8 years ago, I would talk to accountants who had clients in the cannabis industry, and I'd ask them about 280E, and not all of them knew about it. But certainly it's been years that now everybody does. And there's a lot of people talking about it now because it only applies to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. It does not apply to Schedule 3 or below. And there's, of course, a lot of discussion, a lot of belief and hope that cannabis will be rescheduled as shortly as in the next 30 days. We can talk about what that really means, but one of the things that it should almost certainly mean, in fact, I think hopefully there's no doubt, is that 280E would go, away. But until it does, and unless it does, there are specific tactics that dispensary owners should do in particular, but also distributors, brands, anybody that has, what are called trafficking, right? Sales and marketing expenses. Those are the ones that are essentially blocked out by 280E. There are strategies, not for making it go away, because those are illegal, but for, basically minimizing them. And you are best to talk to a very good cannabis attorney because, cannabis tax accountant, because one of the things that people are doing is they're going back and refiling. And it's a strategy that we don't have enough time on, but TrueLeaf has done it. Some of the other MSOs and many other people are going back and they're filing amended returns. There's pros and cons to that. Yeah. But a lot of smart people who've spent a lot of money on getting advice are doing that. So it's worth, sort of looking into. And then until that happens, I mean, just like what Yelena was talking about, I don't know how you are able to run a single store with all of the things go on and then not be able to write off all of the things, because if you can't write off selling expenses, a dispensary is a selling business. Like that's effectively it. So you get effective tax rates that are just unbelievable and inappropriate and so wrong. And, if anybody that's not spending every, waking hour or whatever, really trying to get it rescheduled to 3 or below, I think is missing an opportunity for the industry.
Thanks for sharing that, Wesley and Yelena. I think we opened up a can of worms with the 280E. So we could talk about that for hours. I'm sure we'll have to do that on our next session. But I just wanted to pivot for one more question because I know we're almost at time here. But in terms of growth strategies, can either or both of you share some successful strategies for scaling a dispensary in the current market? A lot of our customers either own a single dispensary or a few dispensaries within the state. So either within the state or into other states.
I mean, from a legal, from a legal perspective, that's definitely not my area of expertise, but just kind of as an observer that sees a lot of businesses, cutting costs is, I think there's a lot of overspending in general, and there was years and years of overspending in the cannabis industry. And I think just figuring out what your budget is, what are the necessary costs, like having somebody dedicated to compliance, that is a necessary cost because that basically just keeps your business compliant and operational, but maybe not having, an excessive amount of, these sales associates or, other people essentially they're, doing your things for your business that you may or may not need, what your marketing budget is. So essentially, figuring out what those sort of line items are and making sure that they're, appropriate for, your business. And then of course, like Wesley's saying, getting a really good CPA to figure out, how to properly file your taxes, what could be, classified as cost of goods, which is something that is deductible for, a retail cannabis business, and essentially, trying to see, where, you can excel. And I mean, growing your business and coming up with some sort of intellectual property. I mean, the businesses that I've seen, they're the most successful in retailers coming up with some, with a brand, with, something that essentially drives traffic. So any strategies you can come up with to essentially get the customers in the door, whatever it may be, for your particular neighborhood, obviously, knowing who your customers are, knowing what kind of product, to sell to your customer, depending on, what your location is. I mean, these are all, very important things to grow your business, and to improve your business.
Yeah, and it's funny, consolidation can have this negative connotation, but the flip side of it is there's some phenomenal operators out there, and they're running one shop really well. And in some ways, that's the most difficult, right? Because if you run an ad, you're able to amortize that against one outlet. If they have one other dispensary, all the marketing costs are effectively halved per store, right? If they want to do, IT work, right, and figuring out what their technology stack is, all those expenses are going against that one store. Whereas if they had 4 stores, now effectively the quarter, and they're competing against people that have 4 stores or 6 stores or so forth. And so I think that, again, some of these operators are so good that partnering up, whether it's doing, maybe if they're not even acquiring and they're doing, what are called MSAs, and Yelena can kind of get into those, but they're, effectively going in saying, let's operate under the same brand. That way we got that, and we'll start being able to share some of these costs. Group buying can be very effective in dealing with vendors, saying, hey, I'm buying more, I'd like to get this. And it's a wonderful way to be able to, effectively increase margins, and not being dependent on, the local jurisdictions and states and so forth, to finally wake up and realize how much they're overcharging this industry. We still need to get to that one day, but that type of sort of consolidation, I think, is, super healthy. And you look basically any other industry, and that's what has happened. And we have to remember cannabis is still very new, and in some markets like Florida, it's starting off, it's, that was the only way it was. But in more of the free-for-all markets, right, the mature markets, the open licensing markets, it's not because of regulation, it's because of economics. And again, I think it can be a very good thing for all of the parties that are involved.
Yeah, and to what you were saying, as far as making yourself attractive for potential, buyout or an exit in the future, unless you're some ridiculously amazing store that just does some insane numbers because of your, whatever it is, an MSO or, a multi-state operator or a publicly traded company or somebody big that's coming to buy you, they're not going to dedicate all that effort and time and money to do due diligence one store, to figure out one store. You know what I mean? They're looking for a package deal. They're looking for 3+ store. You know what I mean? They want to deploy all that effort to do their diligence and whatnot on multiple assets, and that's more attractive to them, which is why you're seeing a lot of consolidation, like Wesley was talking about.
It's easier, going back to the investors, it's easier for somebody to raise money and go, look, we have 4 stores. We'd like to raise money to do the next 3, right? We have LOIs, or we have agreements understanding, or we have these kinds of things like that. Right. And that becomes a really, potentially an interesting growth story. And even if somebody's not profitable, they'll go, but by the 6th store and we're able to do this, we think we'll be at profits, and here's how, and, X, Y, Z.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time. I know you both have a wealth of wisdom, and thank you for all the nuggets that you've shared with us today. Really appreciate it. We'll definitely make some more time to have another AMA session to go a little bit deeper into some of these topics. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Right. Next week, we've got our Expert 420 panel, focused a bit more on 420 and maximizing sales for 420. So please join us then. But yeah, Yelena and Wesley, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kayla.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you both. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.